I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 32, and I never thought my own family would lock me out of my childhood home. Standing in the rain, staring at my mother's text message. We changed all the locks on the front door and also the gate. The betrayal cut deeper than the cold. What they didn't know was that I had discovered their 15-year secret, and that revelation would change our family forever. Before I get into how my picture-perfect family imploded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, smash that like button, and hit subscribe if you enjoy family revenge drama. Trust me, you'll want to see how karma comes full circle in this one. I grew up in Oak Ridge, a small, affluent suburb outside Boston, where everyone knew each other's business, or at least they thought they did. Our family appeared perfect from the outside. My father, Richard, a successful corporate lawyer. My mother, Eleanor, the consummate homemaker who organized every charity event. My older brother, James, the high school football star turned investment banker, and me, the overachieving daughter, constantly in my brother's shadow. Our Georgian colonial home with its manicured lawn and white picket fence was the embodiment of the American dream. Every Christmas, our family portrait would hang proudly on the living room wall. All smiles, all coordinated outfits, all lies. Behind closed doors, our family dynamics were much more complicated. My earliest memories revolve around trying to please my parents, particularly my mother. Eleanor Mitchell had exacting standards for everything from how we dressed to how we spoke, to which friends we could bring home. James could do no wrong in her eyes. He was the golden child who brought home trophies and dated girls from good families. Meanwhile, I was constantly reminded of my shortcomings, however minor they might be. Cassandra, stand up straight. No one likes a girl with poor posture. Cassandra, that B+ simply won't do. The Mitchells aim for excellence. Cassandra, why can't you be more like your brother? My father wasn't much better. He was physically present but emotionally absent, buried in case files or golf outings with clients. The rare moments he gave me attention were when I achieved something noteworthy: perfect SAT scores, acceptance to Yale, landing my first job at a prestigious consulting firm. His love felt conditional, something to be earned rather than freely given. Despite all this, I loved my family fiercely and believed they loved me too in their own flawed way. I accepted the family dynamics as normal. After all, every family had its issues, right? I thought ours were relatively minor compared to friends whose parents were divorced or struggling financially. We had stability, comfort, and a reputation to uphold in the community. The Mitchells were respected, and that counted for something. When I left for college, I felt a sense of freedom I'd never experienced before. At Yale, I could reinvent myself away from my brother's towering shadow and my parents' constant scrutiny. I excelled in my business classes, joined the debate team, and made friends who accepted me for who I was, not for the family I came from. During those years, my relationship with my family actually improved with distance. Phone calls with my mother became less critical and more informative. My father seemed genuinely interested in my studies when I came home for holidays. After graduation, I moved to New York City and began my career in management consulting. The high-pressure environment suited me. I was used to performing under scrutiny and meeting impossible standards. I climbed the corporate ladder quickly, earning promotions and bonuses that made even my father nod with approval. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. My career always came first. 5 years into my career, I met David. He was different from anyone I'd ever dated, kind, patient, and completely unimpressed by status or family name. He was a high school history teacher who loved his job and his students. When I brought him home to meet my parents, their disapproval was immediate and unmistakable. A teacher, Cassandra, really, my mother had whispered harshly in the kitchen, "You could do so much better." "He seems nice enough," my father had said with a shrug, "but is there really a future there? What's his 5-year plan?" Only James had been welcoming pulling David into a conversation about baseball and offering him another beer. It was one of the few times I'd felt truly grateful for my brother. Despite my parents' reservations, David and I got engaged a year later. The wedding planning became a battlefield between my mother's extravagant vision and our more modest preferences. Every decision from the venue to the flowers to the guest list turned into a power struggle. 2 months before the wedding, David and I reached our breaking point after my mother unilaterally changed our wedding venue without consulting us. "I can't do this anymore," David had said, his voice tired. "Your family is suffocating us before we've even started our life together." We postponed the wedding indefinitely, which my mother interpreted as a personal victory. David and I moved in together anyway, buying a small apartment in Brooklyn and building the life we wanted, not the one my family expected. For 2 years, things were strained but manageable with my family. We visited on major holidays, endured the passive-aggressive comments, and escaped back to our sanctuary in the city. Little did I know that our fragile family equilibrium was about to shatter completely, and that the cracks had begun forming long before I was even born. The revelation came on an ordinary Tuesday in April. I had taken a week off work to help David grade final papers and enjoy a mini staycation. That afternoon, I decided to finally digitize our old family photos as a surprise gift for my parents' upcoming 40th wedding anniversary. I'd borrowed several albums from the attic during our last visit, promising my mother I'd handle them with care. As I carefully removed each photo from the adhesive pages, scanning them into my laptop, I noticed something odd about the dates. There was a significant gap in the timeline, almost an entire year, missing between my parents' honeymoon photos and the next set of family gatherings. Curious, I dug deeper into the albums, looking for clues about the missing months. In the back pocket of one album, I found a small envelope that had slipped between the pages. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before, my mother noticeably pregnant standing next to a man who wasn't my father. They were smiling, his arm protectively around her waist, standing in front of what looked like a small apartment building. The back of the photo was dated the 15th of May, 1985, 5 months before my brother James was born. My hands trembled as I stared at the image. The man had the same cleft chin as James, the same set to his shoulders. The resemblance was undeniable. I felt sick to my stomach, the implications crashing over me in waves. Could it be possible? Was James not my father's biological son? I called my cousin Rachel, my mother's sister's daughter, and the only family member I truly trusted. We'd been close as children but had drifted apart in adulthood. "Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," I said without preamble when she answered. "That sounds serious," she replied, her tone immediately concerned. "What's going on? Did something happen before James was born? Something with Mom and another man?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Rachel sighed. "I always wondered if you knew," she said quietly. "It was the family secret. Your mom got pregnant with James before she met your dad. The man's name was Thomas Brennan. They were engaged briefly, but he died in a car accident when your mom was 4 months pregnant. Uncle Richard came into the picture shortly after married your mom and adopted James as his own. They agreed never to tell anyone to protect James and the family reputation. The revelation left me reeling. My entire family history, the narrative I'd grown up believing, was built on a foundation of lies. The perfect Mitchell family was a carefully constructed facade, maintained for over 3 decades through deliberate deception. "Does James know?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't think so," Rachel replied. Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Richard were adamant about keeping it secret. "The only reason I know is because I overheard my mom and yours arguing about it years ago." After hanging up with Rachel, I spent hours researching Thomas Brennan online. I found his obituary from 1985 confirming Rachel's story. He had been a music teacher at a local community college, artistic, well-liked, nothing like my corporate father. I found an old faculty photograph and gasped at the image. James was the spitting image of this man, from the cleft chin to the warm brown eyes. The next discovery came from a local newspaper archive. There was a small announcement of Eleanor Carson and Thomas Brennan's engagement in February 1985. 3 months later, his obituary appeared. The timeline matched perfectly with what Rachel had told me. What shocked me most was realizing that my mother, the same woman who had judged me relentlessly for every perceived misstep, had hidden this significant part of her past. The hypocrisy was staggering. How many times had she criticized my choices, my relationships, my life decisions? How many times had she held me to impossible standards while burying her own history? I was faced with an impossible decision: keep the secret or confront my family with the truth. For 3 days, I barely ate or slept, turning the options over in my mind. David noticed my distraction, but gave me space when I told him I was working through something personal. On Friday morning, I made my decision. I would confront my parents first, give them an opportunity to come clean to James themselves. It would be the right thing to do, the kind, compassionate approach. I booked a train ticket to Boston for Sunday, told David I needed to handle a family matter, and prepared what I would say. Little did I know that someone else had already set events in motion that would make my carefully planned confrontation unnecessary and would tear our family apart in ways I couldn't have imagined. I arrived at my parents' home unannounced on Sunday afternoon, the photograph and my research tucked securely in my bag. The house looked the same as always: pristine, imposing, unwelcoming. I hesitated at the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could ring the bell, I heard raised voices coming from inside. I recognized them immediately: my mother, father, and brother engaged in what sounded like a heated argument. Instinctively, I moved to the side of the house toward the partially open kitchen window, where I could hear more clearly without being seen. "How could you keep this from me my entire life?" James was shouting, his voice raw with emotion. 37 years of lies. We did what we thought was best for you, for all of us, my mother pleaded. "You have to understand the circumstances." "Understand?" James interrupted. "You let me believe Richard was my biological father. You constructed this entire false narrative about our family. And for what? Your precious reputation, your standing in the community." I froze, my blood running cold. Somehow James had discovered the truth before I could tell him. But how? "Son," my father's voice now steady but strained, "I may not be your biological father, but I raised you as my own. I have always considered you my son in every way that matters." "Don't call me that," James snapped. "Don't you dare call me son right now." I leaned closer to the window, straining to hear more. That's when my mother said something that turned my world upside down. "It was Cassandra," she hissed. "She must have found the photograph and told you. She's always been jealous of you, always trying to drive a wedge between us." My heart stopped. She was blaming me. Without any evidence, without even knowing, I discovered the secret. She immediately cast me as the villain in this family drama. "Cassandra doesn't know anything about this," James replied, confusion evident in his voice. "I found out from Rachel. She called me yesterday, said she couldn't keep the secret anymore after all these years." Rachel had betrayed my confidence. The cousin I thought I could trust had gone directly to James with the information I'd shared with her. I felt sick with the realization. Rachel had no right, my mother was saying. This was our family matter to handle. "When exactly were you planning to handle it, Mom?" "When I was 5, 0, 6, 0, never. There was a crash, something being thrown or knocked over, followed by my father's voice trying to calm the situation. "James, please. Let's discuss this rationally. Your mother and I made a decision when you were born that we thought would protect you. Times were different then. An unmarried mother, a deceased father, it would have followed you your entire life. So instead, you built a life on lies," James replied bitterly. And what about Cassandra? Did she ever factor into your decision-making, or was she just the biological child you needed to complete your perfect family image? I held my breath, waiting for their response. The silence stretched for several seconds. "Of course we love Cassandra," my mother finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "She's our daughter." "But not the same way, right?" James pressed. "I always wondered why you were so hard on her, why nothing she did was ever good enough. It makes sense now. She was the biological child who was supposed to be perfect while I was the charity case you took in." "That's not true," my father protested, but weakly. "Isn't it? You've been pushing her away her entire life. The constant criticism, the comparisons, the disapproval of every choice she makes. And yet, despite everything, she's built a successful life on her own terms." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. James was defending me. All these years, I'd assumed he was oblivious to the family dynamics content in his position as the golden child. But he had seen it all, the differential treatment, the impossible standards I was held to. "James, you need to calm down," my mother said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone I knew all too well. "This is exactly why we kept this from you. You're being irrational, making wild accusations." I'm leaving James cut her off. "I need space to process all this. 37 years of lies don't get resolved in one conversation." "Where will you go?" my father asked. "To find my sister," James replied firmly. "She's the only honest person in this family, even if she doesn't know it yet." That was my cue to leave. I backed away from the window and hurried down the driveway, reaching the street just as the front door opened. James emerged, his face flushed with anger, car keys clutched tightly in his hand. He stopped short when he saw me. "Cass, what are you doing here?" I found out, I said, simply holding up my bag. "The photograph, Thomas Brennan. I came to confront them, to give them a chance to tell you themselves." James stared at me for a long moment, then pulled me into a fierce hug. "Let's get out of here," he whispered. "We need to talk." As we drove away, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my mother. "Whatever James has told you is distorted. Come home so we can explain everything properly." I turned off my phone without responding. For the first time in my life, I felt no obligation to answer my mother's summons, no compulsion to smooth things over for the sake of family peace. Something fundamental had shifted, and there was no going back. James drove us to a small coffee shop in the next town over, away from the prying eyes of our parents' social circle. We sat in a corner booth, 2 cups of untouched coffee between us, as I shared everything I'd discovered and how Rachel had apparently betrayed my confidence. James listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "I can't believe Rachel went directly to you," I said, still processing the betrayal. "I specifically told her I wanted to approach Mom and Dad first, give them a chance to handle this properly." James gave a bitter laugh. "Rachel didn't call me out of the blue. I've known about Thomas Brennan for 3 months. My jaw dropped. "What?" "How medical records," he explained. "I needed a family medical history for a life insurance policy. Dad's records didn't match some of my genetic markers, so I had a DNA test done. When the results came back showing Richard Mitchell wasn't my biological father, I started digging." "So you already knew everything before Rachel called you, most of it." "I found the obituary, the engagement announcement. What I didn't know was whether you were aware of any of this. When Rachel called claiming you had just discovered the secret, it confirmed what I suspected. You were as much in the dark as I was." I leaned back in my seat, stunned by this revelation. "So you were at their house today to confront them, and I just happened to show up at the same time. Cosmic timing," James said with a humorless smile. "Or maybe the universe decided 37 years of lies was enough." We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. "Were you serious about what you said in there? About how they treated me?" James looked me straight in the eyes. Cass, I've watched them chip away at your confidence your entire life. Nothing was ever good enough. Not your grades, not your career, not your fiancé. I benefited from their favoritism, and I'm ashamed I never stood up for you more forcefully. Tears welled in my eyes. All these years I'd thought I was alone in seeing the family dynamics for what they were. To hear James validate my experience was both painful and profoundly healing. "What do we do now?" I asked, wiping away a tear. James pulled out his phone. "First, we set some boundaries. I've already told them I won't be at Sunday dinner this week. I suggest you do the same." I nodded, pulling out my own phone to find 3 missed calls and 5 text messages from my mother. The latest one read, "Your brother is upset and not thinking clearly. Please come home so we can discuss this as a family." She's trying to divide and conquer. James observed reading the message over my shoulder. Classic Eleanor Mitchell strategy. I typed a brief response, "I know everything. I need space to process this. Please respect that." Then I turned my phone off again. "So, what's the plan?" I asked James. "We just cut them off." "Not necessarily," he replied thoughtfully, "but we need time to figure out what kind of relationship we want with them moving forward. This changes everything, Cass." The foundation of our family was built on lies. As we left the coffee shop, James suggested I stay with him for a few days, instead of returning to New York immediately. I agreed, calling David to explain the situation. He was understanding as always, offering to come up if I needed support. "Are you going to tell anyone else about this?" I asked as we drove to James's condo. "Like who? My wife. She already knows." I told her when I got the DNA results. "How did she take it?" James smiled for the first time that day. "She said it explained a lot about Mom's behavior at our wedding." We both laughed a brief moment of levity in an otherwise devastating day. For the next 2 days, James and I stayed at his place, ignoring the barrage of calls and messages from our parents. We talked more openly than we ever had before, filling in the gaps of our childhood experiences from our different perspectives. James confessed he'd always felt pressure to be perfect, to justify the love and acceptance he received without understanding why. I admitted to the resentment I'd sometimes felt toward him, knowing now it had been misdirected. On Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a call from my father's office number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Cassandra," my father's voice was formal, as if he were addressing a client. "Your mother and I would appreciate it if you and James would join us for dinner tonight. We need to clear the air." "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Dad." "Please," he said, and for the first time in my life I heard something like desperation in his voice. "We owe you both an explanation, and we'd prefer to do it in person." After consulting with James, we agreed to meet our parents at a restaurant-neutral territory, where we could leave if things became too intense. We chose an upscale place in Boston, where the ambient noise would provide some privacy and the public setting would hopefully keep emotions in check. My parents were already seated when we arrived, both looking noticeably older than they had just days before. My mother had always been meticulous about her appearance, but now her hair seemed hastily styled, her makeup less precise. My father's shoulders were hunched, his usual commanding presence diminished. "Thank you for coming," my mother said as we sat down, her voice carefully controlled. "We have a lot to explain." "Yes, you do," James replied coldly. I placed a hand on his arm, silently urging caution. As angry as we were, this confrontation needed to be productive, not merely cathartic. Perhaps you could start with why I suggested looking directly at my mother. Why keep this secret for so long? Why not tell James the truth when he was old enough to understand? My mother glanced at my father, who nodded slightly. They had clearly discussed their approach beforehand. It began with genuine concern for James's well-being, she started. "When Thomas died, I was devastated and 4 months pregnant. Your father, Richard, had been Thomas's friend. He stepped in to help, and eventually we fell in love." That doesn't explain the decades of deception, James interrupted. We're getting to that, my father said firmly. When we decided to get married, we also decided to give James my name and raise him as my biological son. It seemed simpler, cleaner. There would be no awkward questions, no legal complications. As time passed, my mother continued, it became harder to imagine telling the truth. How do you tell a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a teenager that the man he calls Dad isn't his biological father? We convinced ourselves we were protecting you. And what about me? I asked quietly. Where did I fit into this grand deception? My parents exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Finally, my mother spoke. Cassandra, we never intended to treat you differently. If we were harder on you at times, it wasn't because we loved you less. Then why I pressed, feeling decades of hurt rising to the surface. Because you were ours, my father admitted, his voice barely audible, our biological child. We thought you could handle more pressure, more expectations. With James, we were always compensating for the absence of his biological father, trying to ensure he never felt less than. With you, he trailed off, unable to complete the thought. With me, you felt entitled to demand perfection. I finished for him, because I was the real Mitchell. The truth of it hung in the air between us, neither of my parents able to deny it. We made mistakes, my mother finally said. Terrible mistakes in how we handled this entire situation. But everything we did out of love. Love doesn't justify decades of lies, James said sharply. Love doesn't excuse the way you manipulated both of us. Love doesn't make it okay that you've created this twisted family dynamic that's damaged all of us. The conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, painful truths emerging from all sides. My parents admitted they had never planned to reveal the truth, hoping to take the secret to their graves. James expressed his sense of betrayal, not just at the lie itself, but at being denied knowledge of his biological father. I confronted them about the double standards, the constant criticism, the subtle ways they had undermined my confidence throughout my life. There were tears from all of us. Moments of shouting followed by tense silence. Accusations met with defensiveness, then reluctant admissions. It was exhausting, excruciating, and necessary. As we were preparing to leave, my mother reached for my hand across the table. "What happens now?" she asked, fear evident in her eyes. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I need time." "We both do," James added. "You've had 37 years to live with this truth. We've had days." We left our parents at the restaurant both emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The truth, however painful, was finally out in the open. What we would build from the ashes of our family's foundation remained to be seen. You know, talking about family secrets and the fallout when they're exposed is incredibly emotional. Have you ever had a moment when you discovered something that changed how you viewed your family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you're enjoying this journey with Cassandra so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on what happens next. The confrontation may be over, but the story is far from finished, and you won't want to miss what happens when Cassandra decides to take matters into her own hands. The week following our confrontation with our parents was a blur of emotions and sleepless nights. I returned to New York to David and our apartment, but found myself unable to focus on work or our daily routines. The revelation had shaken the very foundation of my identity. If my family wasn't who I thought they were, then who was I? David was supportive as always, listening patiently as I processed my feelings, offering advice when I asked for it, but mostly just providing a safe space for me to unravel. One evening, as we sat on our small balcony, watching the Brooklyn sunset, he asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What do you want to happen now, Cass? With your parents, with James, with all of it?" I took a long sip of wine, considering. "I want justice, I guess. Accountability, some recognition of the damage they've caused, and what would that look like?" I didn't have an answer then. But the question lingered in my mind, taking root and growing into something more concrete over the following days. James and I stayed in close contact, texting daily and calling several times a week. Our shared experience had forged a new bond between us, stronger than anything we'd had growing up. He was struggling too, trying to reconcile his memories of our father, the man who had raised him, coached his little league team, taught him to drive with the knowledge that biologically they were strangers. Our parents continued their campaign to repair the relationship. Daily text messages expressing regret, emails with old family photos attached, voicemails that became increasingly desperate. My mother even sent flowers to my office with a card that read simply, "We miss you, please call." I ignored them all. James did the same. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I was sorting through some old documents when I came across the paperwork for my trust fund, a substantial sum my grandparents had set aside for me, accessible when I turned 35 or upon my marriage. Whichever came first. James had received an identical trust. Something clicked in my mind. My parents had always used financial security as a form of control. My mother's subtle reminders about the trust whenever I made choices she disapproved of. My father's comments about family legacy and responsibility. The trust wasn't just money, it was a leash keeping me tethered to their expectations. I called James immediately. "I have an idea," I said without preamble. "It's about the trusts." "What about them? What if we donate them? All of it to causes our parents would hate." There was a pause before James burst out laughing. "That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Use their own weapon against them." We spent the next hour brainstorming. The trusts were substantial, each worth approximately $2 million. Together, we could make a significant impact with $4 million. We decided to focus on organizations that supported values directly opposing our parents' conservative worldview: LGBTQ+ rights, immigrant legal aid, progressive political candidates, arts education in underfunded schools. There's one more thing I said as our call was winding down. I want to make it public. A press release, social media, the works. Mitchell heirs donate family fortune to progressive causes or something like that. Mom and Dad would have a collective aneurysm, James replied, considering. Their country club friends, their business associates, everyone would know. Exactly. They've spent their lives caring more about their image than about us. Let's see how they handle a very public dismantling of that image. James hesitated. It's ruthless, Cass. So was what they did to us. After another moment, he agreed. Let's do it. But let's be smart about it. We need a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed our strategy. James, with his financial background, would handle the logistics of accessing and distributing the trust funds. I would manage the public relations aspect, leveraging my consulting contacts to ensure maximum visibility. We decided to time the donations with our parents' 40th wedding anniversary gala, a lavish event they hosted every decade, inviting Boston's social elite to celebrate their perfect marriage and family. The anniversary was 6 weeks away, giving us ample time to prepare. We consulted with financial advisors and lawyers to ensure we could access the trusts without our parents' knowledge. My trust was accessible through marriage, so David and I decided to have a small civil ceremony with just James and his wife as witnesses. James, already 37, had access to his trust, but had never touched it, preferring to build his own wealth. As the plan took shape, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Was this revenge justified? Were we becoming as manipulative as our parents? I voiced these concerns to David one night. "You're not them," he assured me. "This isn't about manipulation. It's about reclaiming your autonomy. They used money to control you. You're using it to break free." His words reassured me, and I threw myself into the preparations with renewed determination. We carefully selected the organizations that would receive our donations, focusing on those that would create lasting, meaningful change. We drafted press releases and social media announcements, timing them to go live the evening of the anniversary gala. 2 weeks before the event, my mother's messages took on a new urgency. "Cassandra, we haven't heard from you or James in over a month. Your father and I are deeply concerned. Please let us know you're all right. The anniversary celebration is in 2 weeks. Your presence would mean everything to us. Please reconsider. Your cousins have been asking about you." What should I tell them? I didn't respond to any of these, but I did forward them to James, who was equally resolute in his silence. 3 days before the gala, my father tried a different approach, sending an email with the subject line, "Financial matters, urgent." The body of the email was brief. "Cassandra, there are some issues with your trust fund that require immediate attention. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I smiled grimly at the screen. They must have been notified of the activity on the accounts. Our plan was already in motion, and they were scrambling to regain control. James called me that evening. "Dad reached out about the trusts. They know something's happening. Let them worry," I replied. "It's too late to stop it now." The night of the gala arrived. James and I had declined our invitations, but we knew exactly what was happening at the Mitchell estate. 150 guests in formal attire, champagne flowing, a string quartet playing in the garden. My parents dressed impeccably, accepting congratulations on 4 decades of marriage and 2 successful children, one conspicuously absent. At precisely 9 p.m., as the toast to the anniversary couple would be taking place, our press releases went live. Major newspapers, local television stations, and social media platforms simultaneously announced the Mitchell heirs' $4 million donation to progressive causes. The press release included a quote from us. "In honor of our parents' commitment to family values, we are dedicating our inheritance to building a more inclusive, equitable future for all families." Within minutes, my phone exploded with notifications. Friends, colleagues, and distant acquaintances expressing surprise and admiration for our generosity. Journalists requesting interviews. And predictably, a series of increasingly frantic messages from my parents. "What have you done?" my mother's text read. "Call me immediately." My father was more direct. "This is unacceptable. You've gone too far." I silenced my phone and poured myself a glass of wine, feeling strangely calm. The plan had worked perfectly. By morning, the story would be everywhere. The Mitchell family's perfectly curated image would be forever altered. My parents would have to face their social circle with the knowledge that their children had publicly rejected their values. It was revenge, yes, but it was also liberation. We had taken the instruments of control and transformed them into vehicles for positive change. The money that had been meant to keep us in line would now help others break free from different kinds of constraints. Later that night, as David slept peacefully beside me, I checked my phone one last time. Among the dozens of notifications was a text from James. "It's done. How do you feel?" I thought for a moment before replying. "Free." What I didn't realize then was that our act of defiance would have consequences far beyond what we had anticipated. The Mitchell family drama was just beginning, and the next chapter would test the limits of forgiveness, redemption, and what it truly means to be a family. The morning after the gala, I woke to over 50 missed calls and dozens of text messages. News of our donation had spread like wildfire through Boston's social circles and beyond. Several local news outlets had picked up the story, framing it as an inspiring tale of generosity. The Mitchell heirs directing their substantial wealth towards social causes. None of them knew the true motivation behind our decision. James called early, his voice a mixture of exhilaration and anxiety. "Have you seen the news coverage? We're trending on Twitter. How bad is it? Depends on your perspective." The organizations are thrilled. My phone's been ringing nonstop with thank you calls. The progressive crowd loves us. The conservative crowd, not so much. I took a deep breath. And our parents, radio silent since last night? I'm guessing they're in full crisis management mode. He wasn't wrong. By midday, I received an email from my father's attorney requesting an urgent family meeting to discuss recent financial decisions and their legal implications. It was a thinly veiled threat, my father resorting to legal intimidation when emotional manipulation had failed. I forwarded the email to James and our own attorney, whom we had wisely retained before executing our plan. Her response was reassuring. The trusts were legally ours to control, and our parents had no recourse to challenge our donations. 3 days passed in a blur of media attention and congratulatory messages from surprising sources. My old Yale professor emailed to express her pride in my philanthropic vision. Colleagues I barely knew stopped by my office to commend my generosity. Even my building's doorman mentioned seeing me on the morning news. Through it all, David remained my anchor, fielding calls when I needed space and shielding me from the most aggressive reporters. On the 4th day, as the media frenzy began to subside, my mother appeared unannounced at our Brooklyn apartment. Mrs. Mitchell David said when he opened the door, his tone carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "I need to speak with my daughter," she replied, her voice brittle with restraint. "Privately." I emerged from our home office where I'd been working remotely to avoid the office attention. My mother looked smaller somehow, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of strain. Her Chanel suit was impeccable as always, but the woman inside it seemed diminished. "You have 15 minutes, I said, gesturing to the living room. "David stays." She nodded stiffly, perching on the edge of our sofa, as if afraid to fully commit to being in our space. David positioned himself in the kitchen present, but giving us a semblance of privacy. "You've made quite a statement," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Your father and I have been fielding calls non-stop. Everyone from the club chairman to Reverend Phillips wants to know why our children have suddenly embraced such progressive causes." "And what have you told them?" I asked, genuinely curious about their damage control strategy. "That we're proud of our children's independent thinking and generosity," she replied smoothly. "What else could we say?" I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You're still doing it. Still maintaining the facade at all costs." "What would you have us do, Cassandra?" "Announce to the world that our family is in shambles, that our children hate us so much they've weaponized their inheritance against us. We don't hate you, Mom. That's the tragic part. We just wanted you to face the consequences of your choices for once." She was silent for a moment, studying me with an intensity I remembered from childhood. "The consequences," she repeated slowly. "Like the consequences your father and I faced when I got pregnant with James. When Thomas died and left me alone, when we made the excruciating decision to build a new life, a stable home for a child who would otherwise have grown up. Fatherless." "Don't twist this," I warned. "You're talking about choices you made 4 decades ago. I'm talking about the choices you've made every day since then, the lies, the manipulation, the conditional love." "Is that what you think?" "That our love was conditional." Her voice cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd heard from her in years. "Wasn't it? Nothing I did was ever good enough. Every achievement came with criticism, every decision with disapproval. Meanwhile, James could do no wrong." "We were harder on you," she admitted quietly. "But not because we loved you less. So you've said." "But actions speak louder than words, Mom. And your actions have shown us exactly where your priorities lie, with appearances, with your social standing, with the perfect family image you constructed." She looked down at her hands now, trembling slightly. "We made mistakes, Cassandra. Terrible mistakes. But what you and James have done, it's cruel." "Cruel." I felt my temper rising. "Was it cruel when you manipulated David and me into postponing our wedding because he didn't meet your standards? Was it cruel when you told me my career choices were disappointing? Was it cruel when you kept James's entire Identity from him for 37 years, she had no answer for that. We sat in tense silence until she finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father has had 2 heart attacks in the past 3 days." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What, minor ones, the doctors say?" "Stress-induced. He's stable now, but—" She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air between us. "That's not fair," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't blame his health on us." "I'm not blaming you," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply telling you the facts. Your father is 72 years old. His heart isn't strong, and the events of the past month have taken their toll." I felt a wave of conflicting emotions: concern for my father, anger at my mother's implicit guilt trip, doubt about our revenge plan. David must have sensed my distress because he moved from the kitchen to stand behind me, a silent show of support. "If you came here hoping I'd apologize for the donations, it's not going to happen," I said finally. "That money is gone, and it's gone to causes we believe in." "I didn't come for an apology," my mother said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "I came to tell you that whatever issues you have with us, whatever pain we've caused you destroying our family, isn't the answer. You destroyed our family the moment you decided that lies were more important than truth," I replied. "James and I are just bringing those lies into the light." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your father is at Massachusetts General, room 412, in case you care to know." After she left, I collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally drained. David sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Do you think she's telling the truth about your dad?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said without hesitation. She'd manipulate, but she wouldn't lie about something I could easily verify. I pulled out my phone, hesitated, then called James. "Dad's in the hospital," I said when he answered. "Heart attacks, according to Mom." James's response was immediate. "I'll book a flight." "Meet you there tomorrow," I agreed, and we hung up. David looked at me questioningly. "You're going. He's still my father," I said simply. "I'm angry, not heartless." The next day, James and I met in the hospital lobby. We hadn't planned it, but we were both wearing black, as if already in mourning for the family we thought we had. Our father looked old in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around him. My mother was absent at home, resting, a nurse informed us. We stood awkwardly at the foot of his bed until he opened his eyes and saw us. "My children," he said, his voice weaker than I remembered. "You came." "Of course we came," James replied, moving to the bedside. "You're our father." The simple statement held volumes: acknowledgement, forgiveness, complexity. We stayed for hours, the conversation, carefully navigating around the elephant in the room. We discussed the hospital food, my father's doctors, a book he'd been reading, normal family topics, as if the past month hadn't happened. As we were preparing to leave, my father reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Cassandra," he said, his eyes clear and direct. "For everything. We thought we were protecting the family, but we were really protecting ourselves." I felt tears welling in my eyes. "I know, Dad. We can't undo the past," he continued. "But perhaps we can build something new. Something honest." It was the first step, small, tentative, but real. As James and I left the hospital, I felt a weight lifting. The revenge had been satisfying in the moment, but it hadn't brought the closure I'd hoped for. Perhaps that would come with time, with truth, with the painful work of rebuilding relationships on a foundation of honesty rather than deception. The following weeks brought gradual changes. My father recovered and returned home. My parents began attending family therapy, initially to appease us, but eventually with genuine commitment. James and I had individual sessions as well, processing decades of complex emotions. The donations remained a point of tension, but as the media attention faded, so did my parents' anger about them. My father even admitted during a particularly honest therapy session that he respected our conviction, if not our methods. "You stood up for what you believe in," he said. That took courage. I wish you'd found a less public way to do it, but I can't fault the principle. 6 months after our family's secret exploded, my parents sold the Georgian colonial that had been our family home for 3 decades. The house had become a symbol of the old Mitchell family, the perfect facade hiding complicated truths. They downsized to a modern condo closer to the city, a space without the weight of history. For Thanksgiving that year, they invited us to the new place, a tentative olive branch. After much discussion, James and I agreed to go, bringing our respective partners for support. The gathering was awkward at times, with conversation occasionally stalling when it veered too close to sensitive topics. But there were also moments of genuine connection, of laughter, of the kind of honesty that had been absent from our family gatherings for decades. As we were leaving, my mother pulled me aside. "I'm trying, Cassandra," she said, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I don't always get it right, but I'm trying." "I know, Mom," I replied, and meant it. So am I. The road to healing would be long and undoubtedly bumpy. Some wounds were too deep to fully heal, some patterns too ingrained to completely break. But we had begun the journey, each step taking us further from the lie-filled past and closer to a future built on truth. James and I remained closer than ever, our shared experience having forged a bond that our parents' favoritism had once made impossible. We talked openly about Thomas Brennan, now researching his life and sharing discoveries. James even visited his grave, placing flowers and introducing himself to the father he never knew. As for my relationship with my parents, it evolved into something different. Not the blind devotion of childhood, nor the bitter estrangement of our revenge phase, but something more balanced. We established boundaries, insisted on honesty, and gradually built a new kind of family dynamic based on who we actually were, rather than who our parents had tried to make us be. The Mitchell family secret had finally been revealed, and in its wake, we were learning what it meant to truly be a family flawed complex, but finally authentic. Today marks 1 year since the truth about our family came to light. Standing in my Brooklyn apartment, looking at the framed photo of James, David, and me from our recent vacation, I realize how far we've come. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary, a painful rebirth of what family means to us. My parents continue their therapy, working through decades of ingrained patterns. My mother calls weekly our conversations still sometimes awkward, but increasingly genuine. My father and James have found a new connection through sailing, spending weekends on my father's small boat, where they talk more openly than they ever did on land. The truth didn't destroy us as my parents feared. It transformed us, forcing us to dismantle the perfect Mitchell family and build something real in its place. I've learned that family isn't about perfection or appearances. It's about acceptance, honesty, and the courage to love each other through our flaws. Sometimes it takes breaking apart to truly come together. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever experienced family secrets or betrayals in your own life, I'd love to hear how you handled it in the comments below. Did karma come back around in your situation? Did you find healing like we did? Please like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life family stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that family. Secrets don't have to define you forever. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak your truth even when it's difficult. I'm grateful to each of you for listening to mine.